That last audio recording laid the ideological groundwork for this one in the sense of one path leading to two, or rather leading to any one of two. And we're going to take one of those forking paths, but there's another which I'll briefly address here at the beginning that we could have taken otherwise, which is to say we could have concluded that the stomach is magical and that evolution or random genetic mutations combined with an unfathomable amount of death does not adequately explain the existence of that miraculous mechanism which is the human stomach, or that it does explain it, but only in the sense of one worldview, only in the way that it is one way of looking, or one way of describing the phenomenon, which fundamentally has a deeper essence, a more mysterious origin. But putting that path aside, a path with questionism of Darwinism, we're going to roll with it. We're going to roll with Darwinism and the way that theory explains human behavior and the realities we see around us. See where it takes us. Where it's going to take us is to this perpetual war between that which is and that which seems to be. A necessary product of the theory of evolution. Because that theory says that when a trait is valuable to the reproductive success of an organism, it will begin to be selected for. So we're going to call these traits which are of primary value, right? Of true value to an organism, because that's how it kicks off the chain of events which we're going to describe. Is that initially a trait, a virtue such as industriousness, contributes to the acquisition of more resources, which contributes to the longevity, the health, the reproductive success of both the offspring of perhaps that individual as well as the village. Okay, so now we have a trait, in this example, industriousness, which is of primary value, of true value, in Darwinian terms. As soon as that occurs, it will begin to be selected for. Mates will seek over time to find industrious mates because that will contribute to the genetic success of their offspring. Tribes will seek to preserve and encourage industriousness to propagate the tribal genetic pool. And now the third link is that once a trait of primary true value begins to be selected for, there will arise a dark doppelganger, a faux trait, which is designed to appear like that primary trait of true value without actually expending the physical resources to have it, right, to acquire it. Not even acquire, to have it intrinsically, right? Or you could say acquire over a period of genetic time. So someone's industrious, they begin to be selected for, industriousness is selected for, people start seeking industriousness, it becomes attractive. Now suddenly, once it's attractive, some creature genetically begins to develop a manner of faking it. What if, instead of actually being industrious, I conserved my resources and then somehow through some external signaling put on a display that signaled or suggested that I am industrious without actually being so. Then I will be selected above the industrious individuals because I have more resources to signal than they do to have. Almost by definition, that's almost always the case, and maybe definitionally the case is that it is, in genetic terms, it is easier to pretend to have something than to actually have it. Just the amount of resources expended in actually acquiring the trait, possessing the trait, is going to take more of a toll on the organism than the faking of it. So now there's genetic pressure to develop that faker, right? That phony virtue, the dark shadow of the real one. I was reading a book of Hindu proverbs. I don't know where they came from, but they said everything is created with its nemesis. Everything is created with its opposite. And this is this war between what is and what seems to be. What has a true virtue and what fakes the virtue. So there's one for every. Every trait which is genetically valuable, be that courage, industriousness, chastity even perhaps, longevity, vigor, prudence, justice, temperance, all of them. There's fake, there's fakers, there's being. Okay, all good. We all understand. Stop repeating yourself. Once we realize that, we also realize that the virtues of primary value are good for the individual and for the tribe. Because they're true, they actually exist. But a faker isn't good for the tribe genetics. It's only good for the individual. Because the fakers are designed to outcompete in the selection process, whereas the traits of primary value are designed to give actual genetic integrity prior to the selection process. And so there's a reason why tribal genetics would want to have the true ones, not the faux ones. Whereas individuals at least might be content to simply have the faux ones. And I think this may be a reason why we see two phenomena. The first is that people like to call out fakers. They like to expose them and shame them in the public sphere because they actually want to get rid of these parasitic genetic freeloaders or hijackers out of their tribal genetics because the full virtues are not actually contributing to the longevity or the health of the organism. So you see people love to call out fakers in public spaces. They like to expose frauds and phonies, even if they themselves, when hidden, when on their own, in private circumstances, are themselves frauds and phonies. And the second phenomenon is that of the prophet, or the archetype of a person whose job in the tribe is to be its surrogate conscience. Such individuals often do not seek their own genetic propagation, but rather that of the entire tribe. And because of this, their focus is more strongly on preserving the primary value of genetic traits over the full value of the dark duplicates. And I have one more point to add, which is that the true risk of these faux traits is that they are selected for without compunction. While it is true that on some level the selecting mate has been deceived by the trait fraud, they also don't care that much, because as long as the fraud was good, that in itself is a trait of genetic success. And so their offspring very likely will be good ponies and good frauds and reproduce. And so their genetic line is relatively preserved. The damage is done to the tribe. It's done not to the individual, because, you know, in some sense, and this is probably explains some of like the fascination with psychopaths, serial killers, narcissists and stuff, right? Or the genetic success of them is that the people they trick are only like slightly tricked, because they only slightly mind being tricked, because as long as the fraud was incredibly good, that in itself is attractive. So you might say, well, I thought you were a brave person, but you're not. But man, you're really good at putting that performance on. And so our kids will probably be the same way, and they will succeed. So I'm repeating myself again, but this is actually a very significant, important concept that I'm saying right now. But it just fundamentally wraps up to that this conflict between what seems and what is, between these two kinds of genetic traits, the one of primary value and the one of only secondary semblance value, or is that one is good for the organism specifically and its offspring, the private individual, we might say, and the other one is good for the tribal organism. And so there is that conflict of, you know, I actually don't mind mating with the psychopath, but I want them called out in the public sphere. I don't really want other people engaging with them. I don't want them around. Oh boy, could I get into how all that plays out in real world modern reality? But we're not going to right now.